Today we're going over an intriguing category of Pokemon, pre-evolutions that eclipse their final stages in the competitive scene. Most of the time the final stage is just out and out better, a fully realized version of its previous self, like Garchomp who can do everything Gabite could do, but better. But sometimes the earlier stage has some unique qualities the final stage lacks that not only set it apart, but flat out make it the better choice, and it's not just because of Eviolite either. We're chronicling all the pre-evolutions that have beaten out their evolutions today, and we're jumping right into our first prankster user with Murkrow. Honchkrow is an immensely dangerous attacker, most notably packing among the game's strongest stab Brave Birds and Sucker Punches, but it's also quite slow and frail, an issue brutally exacerbated in the increased vulnerability of the faster-paced VGC metagame, especially as it doesn't pack any sort of utility. Or rather, it being slow and frail means it isn't capable of providing utility despite its move pool actually being loaded with wonderful support moves. Murkrow, on the other hand, is perfectly suited for their use, a droid at the immediate enabling of its on-the-field teammates in a 2v2 format, and indeed has wielded its support capabilities so effectively as to create a genuinely valuable niche and tournament success, far beyond the near-nothing its evolution has achieved in this regard. Murkrow does this with the one factor Honchkrow can't replicate, its hidden ability, Prankster, which Honchkrow does not have, instead receiving Moxie. Prankster gives priority to the plethora of utility options in Murkrow's move pool. And this is incredible because it has no need for speed EVs, and thus can completely dedicate itself to bulk investment, while its excellent utility moves are going ahead of everything that isn't a faster priority user. This is even more synergistic considering one of said utility moves is Feather Dance, whose harsh attack drops not only makes taking physical attacks a cinch for a Pokemon with base 60 HP and 42 defense, but allows Murkrow to fully invest its non-HP EVs in special defense, letting it eat up Draco Meteors. Again, despite a base 60 HP and 42 special defense. Amusingly, the fact that Murkrow is actually much faster than Honchkrow is largely irrelevant, save for the rare instance where it uses Snarl, which is an attacking move, but used to drop an opponent's special attack, and not for damage. And then there's the main utility moves themselves. The biggest one is Quash, which makes an opposing Pokemon go last and can be utterly game-breaking. Your opponent has Latios, which would outspeed and KO your Garchomp, but Murkrow simply quashes the Latios, which is now forced to go last, and boom, your Garchomp gets to KO it first. Murkrow's got multiple versions of more generalized speed control too, using either Tailwind or Thunder Wave depending on the team. It's so loaded with options, it doesn't even always fit in priority taunt. Murkrow is still quite a specific choice, but it's a legitimate one and beats its evolution out by a landslide. Now moving on to a pair of VGC pre-evolution stars whose greater speed over their evolution was highly significant with Electabuzz and Magmar. Two of a pair, both in-game counterparts and strategically similar in the competitive world, Electabuzz and Magmar have stunned on the VGC world stage. Seeing them always prompts the same reaction from those unfamiliar. Why not Electivire or Magmortar? It seems obvious, but there's just something strange about seeing Pokemon you'd assume were unfinished succeeding where the stakes were highest, though their higher speed played a role. Magmar clocked in at a solid base 93 and Electabuzz at an excellent base 105 as opposed to Magmar's 83 and Electivire's base 93. This, in addition to Eviolite's bulk boost, made them prime candidates for wielding their excellent support moves. While they don't become unbreakable walls, Magmar and Electabuzz, who have the exact same defensive stat spread of base 65 HP, 57 defense, and 85 special defense, actually become quite decent hit takers with Eviolite attached, especially with investment. Wait, support moves? Well, it makes sense, since you'd have to go that direction to eke out a niche over your more powerful evolutions. And indeed, Magmortar and Electivire's signature brands of offense are unimpressive and useless in the world of VGC. But at the same time, since they're so characterized by offense, you don't even think about them having support moves. And both they and their pre-evolutions do, with the biggest one being the double specific Follow Me. Redirection is incredibly powerful, and the fact Follow Me is a priority move means they don't have to focus on speed EVs, able to instead more effectively invest in their boosted bulk, much like Murkrow. Of course, their higher natural speed is useful since they don't have priority on all moves. Magmar, which is actually 2 base points faster than Murkrow's already solid base 91, loves being able to similarly dish out the attack slashing effect of its Will-O-Wisp burns from a good speed stat, while Electabuzz enjoys wielding its effortlessly speedy taunt. Further pushing these two's utility is how their bulk enhanced redirection interacts with their ability, as Vital Spirit lets them blank redirected sleep moves. Magmar's Flame Body can also potentially ruin many a contact move, while Electabuzz can do the same with Static, an ability, incidentally, Electivire doesn't have access to, though even if it did, it'd be outclassed by its pre-evolution just like it is with Vital Spirit, and as Magmortar is as well, despite itself packing both abilities Magmar does. Bulked out Follow Me goes a long way, and actually on that subject, next up we've got Clefairy. Clefable rules the roost in singles, but in VGC, its pre-evolution overtakes it with ease in ways that Clefable can't hope to make reality. Here, it's not a case of Clefable's Eviolite-fueled bulk over its evolution. The difference is marginal, and for the same reasons you wouldn't use Eviolite Ferroseed instead of Ferrothorn, Clefable, renowned for walling some of the most dangerous Pokemon in the game with Quagsire-esque defiance of power creep, hardly needs the minor extra help taking hits. It rather used some sort of utility item and would relish in being able to actually do some real damage to the opponent if and when necessary. The reason Clefairy is so vastly superior though is its extraordinarily double specific ability that its evolution lacks, Friend Guard. Clefairy's added bulk is of course very nice in enabling its own series of excellent utility moves. As such, yes, Follow Me, as well as the amazing power boost of Helping Hand, the tremendous longevity reinforcement of Heal Pulse, and even the speed control of Icy Wind, but Clefairy is providing some of the best support imaginable without even using any moves, simply by being on the field. Friend Guard reduces damage from every single attack aimed at Clefairy's teammates, bringing them down to 3/4 of their would-be damage. This is absolutely incredible. To take the most obvious example, a move that will deal 100% won't even come close to KOing, doing 75% instead. The existence of damage rolls aside, slashing damage to this extent in an as fast pace and threshold heavy a format as VGC is incredible. It makes good Pokemon great and turns great Pokemon into Superman. This would be pretty extraordinary on most Pokemon, but is tremendously enhanced by also being loaded as it is with a move pool of such vast impactful utility. Follow Me alone would be more than sufficient, let alone the embarrassment of riches it can barely fit into 4 move slots. Which again, Clefable could do, but it could literally take KOs away from moves aimed at its teammates simply by being on the field. Now speaking of getting one up on your evolution in a completely distinct way, we have Porygon 2. Porygon Z is no slouch. Coming to fame as a special attacker that can one-hit KO Blissey with just one turn of setup through its Nasty Plot Life Orb Adaptability Hyper Beam. Amazingly, it doesn't even need a hit for super effective damage. Its power is undeniably impressive no matter how many other overwrought Blissey destroyers come around. Even though Porygon Z's shattering strength may ultimately be secondary to its defensive uselessness, it usually stands far ahead of its evolution. The thing is, Porygon 2 was no standard pre-evolution. It was no lesser, weaker form of what Porygon Z would become. It wasn't just that it was a final stage Pokemon for 2 generations. It's that it was a completely different type of Pokemon whose vast defensive utility was far more broadly useful than Porygon Z's demolition antics, which, for all their power, were often rendered, if not obsolete, then definitively second-rate for how interchangeable with other hard-hitting Pokemon packing more than just high damage output, as well as more useful stab types than normal. Porygon 2's excellent defensive leanings went back to a Porygon Z-less world back when Cursed Gone 2, as Porygon 2's curse set was called, answered none other than the mighty Snorlax in Gen 2, and when in Gen 3 it gained Trace to reverse trap Dugtrio's Arena Trap and even used Jolteon's Vault Absorb and Flygon's Levitate abilities against their main stab moves. It also hard countered Dragon Dance Salamence and Gyarados and was generally difficult for offensive teams to KO. It could even shrug off status by tracing Natural Cure against Blissey, Starmie, or Celebi. However, even when Porygon Z arrived in Gen 4, Porygon 2 had greater utility. Porygon Z may have gotten banned from UU for its thorough obliteration of the tier, but Porygon 2 was the preferred Porygon in OU for how much of the standard metagame's best Pokemon it effortlessly shut down. It only got better at answering the monstrously broken Dragon Dance Mence and Gyarados thanks to Trace now bouncing back Intimidate, while also being able to withstand even Specs Heatran's overheat thanks to tracing Flash Fire. Additionally, with Trick Room introduced in this gen, the Porygon line gaining the move would be best used by Porygon 2 and its excellent bulk, giving it great potential in VGC, and it would really come into its own in Gen 5 when Eviolite came around. Suddenly, Porygon 2, a Pokemon already difficult to take down, was one of the most monstrously unbreakable walls in the game. Obscenely strong moves like Choice Specs Draco Meteors bounce right off. Porygon Z's power possibilities paled in comparison in singles and VGC alike, where Porygon 2's hit-taking ability for both physical and special hits was uniquely valuable given how brutally assailed everything was becoming by outrageous power creep. It was so bulky, it didn't matter that it had no resist, only a nearly unused ghost immunity. The Eviolite was what effectively gave what was already a bulky Pokemon resist to everything but fighting, and even if you did launch a stab close combat at it, it was far from a guarantee you'd actually be able to take it out. For instance, a physically defensive Porygon 2 could survive such a hit from the immense power of a Choice Band Terrakion. Porygon 2 was so bulky, in fact, it was touted as the only counter to none other than Mega Rayquaza. Plus, it was so excellent as a Trick Room setter, not just because it could take a hit, but was perfectly capable of dishing them out too, with good special attack boosted by its download ability. Porygon 2 may have carried many of the flaws of slow utility Pokemon, but boy was it a phenomenal hit taker, and that carried it past its evolution. Now, speaking of slow, mega tanky VGC Trick Room stars, we have Dusclops. Dusknoir was cause for excitement at first. Dusclops had already been incredibly tanky, and now it had even better bulk alongside an actual attack stat, so it would no longer be so ridiculously passive. It seemed like the kind of all-around upgrade that a final evolution is supposed to be, especially cross-generationally, the ultimate essence of what the Pokemon was originally supposed to be. However, Noir ultimately fell into the big sleep, because its boosts over Clops were ultimately a pallet effect. Its added wasn't enough to keep up with the increased power level, especially since it hadn't gained any form of reliable recovery, and that supposed actual attacks wound up a red herring thanks to the ridiculously low power of its moves. Stab Shadow Punch wasn't striking fear into anything with health enough to make a substitute. Then Gen 5's Eviolite came, and with it, the long goodbye to Noir as Dusclops emerged as a VGC Trick Room setter extraordinaire, leaving its evolution's hit-taking in the dust. It had bulk compared to Porygon 2, but though its low HP undercut its highest defenses, Dusclops more than compensated with its ghost typing, providing it incredible immunities, not just to close combat, but arguably more importantly, to fake out. Being able to threaten this strategy so effortlessly against such a key, common first-turn tactic was crucial. Though it wasn't dealing out actual damage, it was still impactful post-Trick Room, and how it was able to threaten to utterly ruin physical attackers with Will-O-Wisp, and it could even weaponize its low HP by using Pain Split to siphon off larger chunks of the opponent's own. Also superior to Dust Noir in this regard for the lower base HP stat. Dusclops' lack of direct threat could certainly bite, but as far as justification for such a Pokemon, you didn't get better than Trick Room, and it excelled at that. Even at its worst though, it was a far more successful competitive choice than Dust Noir ever was, other than the legend of Ice Punch Noir, aka the Big Lebowski of competitive Pokemon. Now let's launch into the inherent vice of our next pre-evolved troublemaker with Chansey. Blissey was singles' greatest wall, so obscenely bulky on the special side as to effectively resist pretty much everything. Even non-stab Focus Blast, which was the vast majority of them, tended to bounce off. Its HP was so ridiculous, it wasn't bad at taking many physical attacks, despite its strong contention for worst in the game defense. Chansey had reigned over Gen 1, but Blissey came to completely and utterly eclipse Chansey in Gen 2. But then with Gen 5's Eviolite, Chansey would once again eclipse Blissey. It wasn't quite so automatic back then. Sandstall teams far preferred Blissey, whose leftovers crucially cancelled out the sand damage so as to not passively force itself to heal. But if you weren't using sand, then Chansey was wholly superior, and that was before sand was no longer permanent in Gen 6 and onwards, where Chansey became unquestionable, so much so that Blissey dropped to UU in Gen 6 and 7, where Chansey was the OU walling blob, no two ways about it. The extra bulk was critical in staving off the monsters populating Gens 5 through 7. Blissey did have its advantages. In addition to leftovers' passive healing, it wasn't deathly afraid of losing its item to the newly buffed and thus popular knockoff, which would indeed render Chansey fully inferior. Plus, Blissey's special attack, while not great, was sufficient to occasionally reach into its excellent special attacking move pool for coverage against a key target, which the offensively inept Chansey couldn't do. These advantages were far from significant, yet they paled in comparison to Chansey's utterly ludicrous bulk. As one absurd example, whereas Choice Band Tyranitar's superpower effortlessly dropped Blissey for the cleanest of one-hit KOs, doing a minimum of 111%, the same move would never take full health Chansey out in one shot, maxing out at roughly 98%. Keldeo's Choice Spec Secret Sword would similarly come up short, and most moves you'd have your Chansey take, even the powerful ones, wouldn't be dealing anywhere near this level of damage. Max attack Landorus Theory and Earthquake was a 3-hit KO even with Stealth Rock in play. Most special attacks barely registered. Now, this one does come with the caveat that Blissey eventually came back to eclipse Chansey in Gens 8 and 9 thanks to its item flexibility letting it hold heavy-duty boots, whose ability to ignore hazards, a long-standing deep-seated thorn in the side of both blobs, proved a greater overall asset to its hit-taking than Chansey's superior withstanding of direct damage. Having said that, Chansey's significant run as the better blob merits its inclusion. And now we have a pivot into a different direction with Vigoroth. Make no mistake, Vigoroth is not a good Pokemon, in singles or VGC. It is, however, a better Pokemon than its evolution, which is renowned as one of the worst in the entire game. So the bar isn't high, but how does Vigoroth achieve this? Well, it's a very different Pokemon from Slacking, which is all about its extremes. Truant renders it useless every other turn, but in exchange, it boasts an attack stat that well surpasses Groudon's. Vigoroth is not some sort of trial run for this concept. Rather, it looks like many other middle stage Pokemon, with a stat spread not dissimilar to the starters of its native Gen 3. This of course does not make for a good Pokemon, it's not supposed to, yet when juxtaposed against the staggering uselessness of Slacking, its base 80 attack, base 90 speed, and quite serviceable Eviolite bolstered bulk of base 80 HP, 80 defense, and 55 special defense winds up looking like the second coming of Mega Rayquaza. Even in the lowest singles tiers, Vigoroth is not great, but it did have its shining moment in Gen 6 6 when PU was introduced. There, its bulk up Slack Off set demolished the tier to the point where it needed to be banned. Meanwhile, Slack King was untiered. This might be the most resounding own ever perpetuated by a pre-evolution. The final stage isn't good enough for the lowest tier, while the middle stage is too good for said tier and requires the ban hammer. The one exception to this is that Slack King did have a real niche in Gen 3 OU, but amazingly, as time went on, Vigoroth wound up being the better choice, even if it wasn't a Pokemon you'd actually want to use in most places. And before we go to our finale, we've got a quick honorable mention. Magneton in Gen 4 singles. It's not openly superior to Magnezone, which is also an excellent Pokemon, but on many teams, Magneton is preferred thanks to its higher speed stat, which with a Choice Scarf, place it ahead of many key targets Scarf Magnezone would come up short against. Starmie, and after a Dragon Dance boost, the trio of Gyarados, Dragonite, and Tyranitar. Of course, Magnezone's greater bulk and power make it better suited to non-Scarf sets, which are also key parts of the metagame, so it's really team dependent. The two are quite neck and neck, and both are effectively the same in overall viability, but if you need the speed, as many teams do, Magneton's your magnet. Now we're finishing this off where it started, with some devastating prankster shenanigans with Riolu. Riolu better than Lucario? Really? In Gens 8 and 9? Yes. 1. Lucario's Mega from Gen 6 and 7 is absent. 2. Gen 8 sees the introduction of the move Coaching, which boosts an ally's attack and defense by 1, basically giving them a free bulk up. Like Murkrow, Riolu's hidden ability is Prankster, which its evolution does not possess, with Lucario having gained Justified instead. Grabbing an attack boost off Dark-type moves is cool, but you know what's cooler? Being the only Pokemon in the game with both Prankster and Coaching. Giving your teammate a priority bulk up is incredible support, especially since you can effectively activate it on your ally instantly. Right as they attack, you can have a fast physical attacker that might come up just short of a KO, and bam, you give it the boost that pushes it over the edge, like a helping hand that lasts beyond its turn of use, and even makes the beneficiary more difficult to take out and return on the physical side as well. This is already impressive, but it's not all Riolu's Prankster pulls off. It also has Copycat, which is incredibly helpful. Your opponent set up Trick Room? Well, thanks to the move's negative priority, it's the last move used. So now Riolu's going to copycat that with Prankster's priority, which overrides Trick Room's negative priority and resets the dimensions, disrupting the strategy your opponent's team relies on. Alternatively, Riolu could actually set Trick Room this way in conjunction with a Dynamax ally, as a Dynamax Pokemon's Trick Room becomes Max Guard. But since you can't copy Max moves, you'll instead copy the Trick Room. Once again, with priority, a just about guaranteed setup. Riolu's ridiculous frailty is beyond the help of even Eviolite, instead requiring Focus Sash, but even still, the utility of these two moves with Prankster's priority is seriously game-breaking, and thus eclipses Lucario's offense, which isn't really suited to VGC. And thank you so much to our Platinum patrons. Thank you to Amphozenus, Alex Sable, Anthony Belval Renault, Daniel Isbeast, Corman, Eric Dissing, Funky, Glitcherton, Howl, Jack G, King Yabber, Nightfall, Megamon VGC, Mojo Gameslayer, Nurse Jake, One Penguin to Rule, Pretzel SP, Seagulls Incorporated, Soljiro Sakura, Spavoon, Skylaria, Soras and Croxon, Shiwei Miji, Stoneface Colin, Tyler, Kiboflu, Wardine, Zathor for their major support of our videos.